In the last video, we demonstrated how to create zones and load samples into them. In those examples, we were using one-shot samples such as drum hits. Mapping these samples to keys is pretty straightforward. Map the samples to the keys that you feel comfortable playing them from. However, if you are working with a series of melodic samples that make up a full patch, such as the strings library we looked at in the second installment of the Directwave videos, then of course you'll need to map the samples to the correct note based on the sample's recorded pitch. This is known as the root key. Let's begin by importing a melodic sample. In this example, I will load a simple bass guitar note. As we learned in the last video, the newly created zone will cover the entire keyboard. By default, the root note is set to C5. This will be the same for any newly created zone. Our goal here is to map this zone so that the pitch of the sample matches the note that is mapped to. There are a few ways to do this. With a lot of the samples that you may have already or will acquire, they will have the root note in the file names. For example, our bass sample here, by looking at the name, we can see that its root note is C1. Now the zone we created for its root note is mapped to C5, so we need to adjust this. As with many things in Directwave, there are a few ways to do this. If you know the number of semitones from C0 to the root note, then you can enter it in the root column of the zone. For example, C1 is 12 semitones from C0, so by entering 12 in the root column, the root note is set to C1. However, an easier way without having to calculate the number of semitones is to locate the desired root note on the keyboard and right-click on it to set it to be the root note. There may be a situation when you do not know the pitch of the recorded sample, and it may not be in the sample's file name. Directwave is able to analyze the sample and determine the sample's pitch. To do this, right-click on the selected zone and from the pop-up window, select Find Pitch Root. Once the detection is complete, Directwave will inform you of the results and move the root note to the correct pitch. Now that the root note is set, each note you play on the keyboard will be played in the correct pitch. However, in our example here, it is a hard stretch to have a single C1 bass note being pitch shifted more than 12 semitones before it begins to sound a tad synthetic. Therefore, many sample sets will come with the same sample, however, played at a different pitch. Here we have a bass sample with the root note of C1, and another sample with the root note recorded at C2. So what I'm going to do is edit the zone so that it ends one semitone before C2. Then create a new zone with our C2 sample loaded in it by dragging the C2 bass note sample into the empty section of the zone editor. Of course, we will need to set the root note of the second zone to C2. This allows us to gain one more octave of bass samples without the need to over-pitch shift the first bass sample. So, in this video, we had a look at creating zones for use of melodic samples. In the next video, we'll look at basic loop editing of the loaded samples.